Introduce our speaker, who is no stranger to everybody here. We decided today we're the Blues Twins. But here's what he asked me to say as far as an introduction. I'm delighted to introduce to you my friend and longtime colleague, Dan Freeman.
Thanks, Bets. And her next job is to make sure I don't walk too far away from this microphone. And I'll try to make it clear to all of you. But also bear with me today, because I've studied neither history nor theology as an academic. Something as an autodidact, I guess, fancy word. But I want to share part of my life story with you. I will rearrange history as I need to talk about how I lived, while acknowledging the real time of events as much as possible. Similarly, being a mathematician, it's important for me to begin with definitions of monotheism and radical monotheism. Monotheism is the worship of a single God, as opposed to polytheism, where many gods are recognized and a single deity is rarely singled out as for preference. Examples of monotheism include Atonism, I'll come back to, Baha'i faith, Christianity, deism, Sikhism, Islam, Judaism, Zoroastrianism, and so forth. Now, by radical monotheism, I mean the belief in a unique deity that either establishes a cultural identity or includes a mandate for evangelism. Judaism is an example of the first. Christianity and Islam are examples of the latter. Okay, now the family story begins, so you can relax. No more academics for a while. Now, according to a family legend, at the age of 3, the Shore Patrol found me on my trike looking for a church. My faith journey began with that ride across a bridge in Corpus Christi. And Amazing Grace nicely summarizes the start of my faith journey. It led to regular church attendance, Bible study, church history study, and perhaps even a latent desire to attend seminary. The study led me to realize that Christianity is more than the nice Sunday school verses. It had deep roots in older religions, in particular one to which I will return. It addresses the problem of sin with the promise of salvation. Its avatar is Jesus, who promises salvation that comes with unquestioning belief. Moreover, he gave the Great Commission. Go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything I have commanded you. This statement calls for the spreading of Christian beliefs through evangelism. Now, Christianity remained largely a cult religion, practiced in homes and small gatherings like ours for hundreds of years. It was led by apostles like Paul and others. Christianity spread throughout the Middle East and the Western Roman Empire. A largely communal and private religion, it suffered occasional oppression by Roman and other forces. Things changed dramatically in 312 at the Battle of Milvian Bridge, when Constantine the Great had his soldiers paint the Cairo symbol on their shields. This is a cross with a single symbol. His victory led to his emperorship. In 313, the co-emperor Licinius and he developed what's called the Edict of Milan, which allowed anyone to worship any deity. Effectively, this allowed Christians to practice their faith without persecution. Constantine was followed by a series of civil wars and emperors with varying attitudes towards religions. After these series of wars, Theodosius the Great assumed Roman emperorship in 379. And in 381, he convened the First Council of Constantinople, which affirmed the Nicene Creed and established Catholicism as the unifying state religion. Subsequent Roman emperors destroyed pagan temples and persecuted heretics. Following the Great Commission, subsequent monarchs and popes launched crusades to convert Western Europe to a Roman Catholic faith. The Eastern Empire similarly proselytized the Balkans, Russia, the Levant to Orthodox Christian faith. This split occurred around 1000. The conquest and conversion of Europe was followed by the export of Christianity throughout the world. Recognition of the complexity of this religion, and that is complex, led me to seek a simpler route. I went to college. In my freshman year, I met the first Jew I'd ever known. Mark Scheingorn burst into my dorm room and asked me my name, Freeman, why my name had been changed. I was shocked by a question I had never been asked. After some verbal scuffling, I began to learn about his faith. In simple terms, following Stephen Prothero, who characterizes Judaism as the way of exile and return. The Torah binds the people to a single God by telling them the story of the foundations of life and coming out of bondage. At the beginning of the book of Deuteronomy, the last book of the Torah, Moses stands in view of the land of promise, where God says to him, according to the Torah, "This is the land which I swore to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I will give to your offspring." Moses left an enduring legacy of a people and a culture. The Hebrew Bible, or Mikra, consists of the Torah, the prophets, the writings. But most importantly, the Torah tells the story of the formation of the Jewish people and a set of rules that bound them to a single God. The remaining books then provide a story of conquest of Israel and the subsequent struggles to maintain a separate culture. Ultimately, the story leads to the rebuilding of Solomon's temple and a reoccupation of Judah and Israel. Most critically, the Torah provides the foundation story that would bind the people together. It is a binding that lasts through today. It is a binding that depends on the specific relationship to a unique and all-powerful God. Well, Mark's faith fascinated me, but it was not my heritage. And, as they say, life happens. I avoided work by going to graduate school, and I met the love of my life, Jean Freeman. Some of you knew her. We had a child, Liddy. Some of you know her. We taught at Yale and Dartmouth. Ultimately, we came to Galveston to flee the annual New England hurricanes they call winter. Toward the end of my career, though, I went through rehab for bad knees and bad elbows. It required swimming regularly, where I met Ahmed. He is, and I think some of you may know him, he writes in the paper regularly. This required, though, that I met him, and he's a gentle soul, for those of you who know him. And he never questioned my name, more importantly. He did give me an abiding interest in Islam, to the extent that I read the Quran straight through at least once. Again, I used Prothero and others as guides to find that Islam emerged along a path like that of Judaism and Christianity. The central problem being an insistence on self-sufficiency or pride of self. Sounds oddly familiar in Texas. The solution is submission to a God that is unique and provides everything to the believer. The avatar is Muhammad, God's last prophet. Muhammad wrote down the Quran with his hand guided by God. Among the many verses of the Quran, there is a call to evangelism. The Dawah makes clear that believers should invite people to do what is good, advocate righteousness, and forbid evil. This welcome is accompanied by charitable outreach. The advocacy for Allah also required that Muhammad unify the Arab tribes in Medina. He then returned to Mecca and destroyed the pagan idols in about 630 CE. After his death, civil war broke out among his followers. The split led to the emergence of Shia and Sunni sects, along with other groups. The concept of jihad, or struggle to conform to God's guidance, also emerged. Arguably, this encouraged the conquest of North Africa, the Balkans, Iberia, and South Asia. major Muslim empires emerged in West Africa and from Iran to Indonesia. From this I learned it's a small step from an invitation to Islam to the conquest as a means of evangelism. Subsequently, the West attempted through crusades to control Jerusalem, and there was a response to the Muslim resistance and Renaissance. Serious resentment remains in the form of Wahhabism and the Palestinian resistance.
Hey, Luke.
After retiring, Gene and I began.
I hope you're okay. I split them up.
Then came COVID-19. Remember that bad case of the flu? Simultaneously, her Alzheimer's disease increased to the point where she could no longer be independent. Ultimately, I placed her in permanent assisted living. This allowed me to travel again, albeit alone. Among my first trips was to Egypt. Here in the wonderful Cairo Museum, I found a new religion. Egypt is a remarkable country with continuous civilization which dates back more than 5,000 years. When Upper and Lower Egypt were united to form the first dynasty, mammoths still roam Siberia. That's how old it is. It really is old, and it's still there in the form of that museum. Through most of the time, the early, middle, and late dynasties, art and architecture was extraordinarily stable and stylized. Example is this unknown pharaoh, which you see in your handout, and I think we might be able to show it. It shows a pharaoh who in death became a god. This is an image of a single pharaoh. He's unknown, but he's one of almost 28 pharaohs in any given, one of a pharaoh in one of 28 dynasties. He is a fixed position. His position of his arms and feet indicate he's death and he's a godhead. Quite remarkable. However, in about 1350 BC, before the Common Era, an Egyptian pharaoh, Amenhotep IV, came to power. He revolutionized the polytheistic religions of Egypt by elevating Aten, sometimes known as Ra, as the sun god, to the primary and possibly unique god of Egypt. He and his wife, Nefertiti, and I think we have a picture here sooner or later of Aten, promoted this religion to the extent of building new temples in Luxor on the Nile River, at Karnak, to Aten, this new single god, and changing his name to Akhenaten, which means the effective of Aten. This is an image of Pharaoh Akhenaten. Notice the extraordinary realism of the sculpture. Akhenaten has a complex, almost feminine body. This is unique in Egyptian culture, this very special, almost genderless image. Nefertiti is simply beautiful. It's next to him, the next image. We only have one piece of sculpture of her remaining, and it's quite remarkable to me. Again, this is realistic art which occurred for a period of about 10 years out of 5,000. The emphasis on realism vanished. Soon after Akhenaten's death, Egyptian art returned to its older stylized art forms for the next 1,300 years. Upon his death, his successor, Pharaoh Akhenaten, also known as King Tut, changed his name to Tutankhamun, returned Egypt to its traditional religious systems, and attempted to erase all evidence of the cult of Aten. Evidence of Aten then remained buried until the late 19th century of the Common Era. Okay, I've given a highly idiosyncratic, I love that word, idiosyncratic, that means I'm an idiot, no. Overview of 3 radical monotheistic religions and a much older monotheistic religion that was literally buried. Atenism was completely gone by the beginning of the late Bronze Age collapse about 1200 BCE. Plausibly, monotheism is more likely to endure than radicalization. Plausibly, monotheism is more likely to endure with radicalization than if simply being professed. The first of the monotheistic religions, Judaism, has unified the Hebrew people from the 7th century BC to the present. Out of it, Christianity emerged partly as a means of stabilizing the Roman Empire. Islam emerged and stabilized much of Asia, Africa, and Eastern Europe. But beginning in 1450s, things changed. After a period of discovery and conflict, Christians from Europe overran the New World, Asia, Africa. Hundreds of indigenous nations fell to the onslaught and conquest and conversion from Europe. The singular ability of radical monotheism to provide a systematic mechanism for unification has proved largely unstoppable as a force for domination and stability. Well, where does this leave that boy on the bridge in Corpus Christi? Exemplifying the riddle of the Sphinx, he now walks the stick often. I struggle with my original belief that God of cultural exclusion and evangelism is also a God of love. I know the catastrophic consequences of the former, but I have experienced the absence of the latter as well through the reality of Jean's inevitable death from Alzheimer's. Where am I now? With only questions and emotions. But faith, that's so much harder. Faith equals trust, but faith is not hope. Belief equals conviction that brings hope. With Jean's illness, I realized I can no longer trust God. It is unlikely there is a loving God, but we can explore, we can be brave, we can be kind. But can we be love? I don't know. Amen.